Welcome to Food, Wine, and Whiskey, a podcast about having fun conversations on tasty dishes, vinos, and spirits from around the world. Rob is your host. He is an avid home chef, WSET Level 2 award in wine, and a whiskey drinker and collector. Time to set the table. Here's Rob.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Thanks so much for stopping by for another conversation. And this one is all about Central Italy. John Fodera, my guest, back on the show, frequent contributor to Food, Wine, and Whiskey. John, how you doing?
Doing well, Rob. Yeah, I was going to say I've lost track of how many times I've been on now, but it's always a good time to come by. So always look forward to it.
Yeah, and this is a good time of year to have you come by. And as people can see by the title of this episode tonight, it's the state of Tuscany. And we did this last year, and I really liked it because you take this annual trip, and I want you to talk a little bit about your trip because it's not just you taking a trip. This is something that if listeners might be interested in at some point, they can reach out to you, contact you, and maybe participate. But you just, in middle of September, got back from a trip in Tuscany, visiting with all the different wineries and producers and vineyards. And you have what we're going to talk about tonight would be a good update on, as the title says, the state of Tuscany.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So right now, once a year, I'm leading a tour to Tuscany. We call it the Rustic Tuscany Tour. And it's essentially curated from my social media, all my social media channels, including my website. But it's a 10 and a half, 11-day tour that we touch, all the kind of the back roads of Tuscany. When I set it up with my partner, originally our goal was not to see another tourist. We both have extensive experience with the region. So in fact, the 2025 tour is sold out, but we just finished laying out most of the itinerary today, as a matter of fact. So we've got 11 days, 15 wineries, from Maremma through Montalcino and into Chianti Classico and beyond, all the classic hill towns. And it's a great trip. It's been really well received. This will be the fourth one now in 2025, and it's a lot of word of mouth, a lot of interest. So yeah, it sells out quickly because we only take 12 people. Although, depending on how things shake out, we might bring 18 for 2026, but we'll have to wait and see. Yeah. Yeah, it's I have to talk to people that are that were on the waiting list. So they're either going to maybe want to come in 26 or they're going to be pushed off till 27. We'll see what happens. But my partner and I were talking, and he's like, we could squeeze in, 18, but we'll see.
Yeah, I'm sure figuring it out to make sure people get that, punch, that bang for their buck, so to speak, that experience that they're looking for. So I'm sure you and your partner will make that work.
We want it to be very intimate and very personal. As it is now, there's one of us to six of the guests, and it's been working fine. So we'll see.
And with the size group you have, you can't help but get to know each other, make friends, and hopefully become friends when you come back to the States, or I say the States, you have people who participate in your tour from all over the globe, different countries. So they stay in contact, hopefully.
Yeah, we've had 4 or 5 different countries besides the United States so far. And they do, because one of the things we do for the group is we set up a group chat for them on WhatsApp. Just in case, we get separated and we need to reach out to them, with a reliable, means of communication. But, if the future is the same as the past, the people still chat with each other in that group chat, well after the trip is over. So yeah, they do become friends. And we've had a good group of people each time. I don't know if it's the wine that binds people or the love of Italy, but they have that shared interest, and that's a big first step.
Anytime you can get people together around a table with good food and good wine, I think it's kind of hard not to become friends and like one another.
Well, that's probably true too.
Hey, for those who maybe haven't listened to an episode that you've been on previously, we've done a lot of fun episodes. Just tell everybody where they can find you, and I'll just say quickly, John is a wine journalist, specifically, I would say Italy, focusing a lot on Tuscany. But where can folks find you? What do they find when they come to your website? Things like that.
Yep. So the website is johnfodera.com. You can Google Tuscan Vines. It'll be the first or second hit that comes up. The website is, mostly wine coverage, but I do the cooking in the family. I've had a little bit of history there for a long time. So there's probably well over 200 recipes on my website. Food goes with wine and vice versa. So you don't ever have, one without the other in Italy. So when I started making things that I thought, were interesting, I just started documenting that too. So there's some cultural articles about Italy there, but, the bulk of it is wine and food. But if they're looking to engage with me, on a regular or daily basis, I obviously update my website, several times a month. I publish new content. But on Twitter/X, I engage heavily, and as well as Facebook and Instagram, probably a little bit less there, but still, when I have new content, that's where it gets published.
I do want to say about your website when you say, well, let me say this first of all: the food that you cook, the amount of recipes, the number of recipes, you probably have nearing, I don't know, 200 or more recipes on your.
I would think so.
Yeah, you've got great Italian food recipes. People are going to look at these and go, never heard of it, but it looks delicious. So yeah, I'm going to try to make this. And most of them are fantastic. I say most of them, all of them that I've made have been fantastic. But, something you said about, a lot of it is wine coverage. I want to expand on that just a bit because you do such a good job of telling the story behind the wine, and I think a lot of time as wine drinkers, there's this history, there's this culture, there's people behind the wines that are in our glass. And when you drink a wine that you really like, you really enjoy, at least I do. And I think folks that I know want to go explore, what's the story behind this wine? Who's the family? What's the history here? And I think you do a really good job. I want people to know that they're not going to just get a wine, a picture of it and a score. Yeah, it's good. You really tell a story about, how this winery, the history of it, how it may have transferred from one family to another, or from a parent to a child or something like that, but also about, just the vineyards and just the complete story about these wines, which I think gives you a little bit more appreciation for what you might go look for based on what you're telling us about the wine in the glass.
Right. Yeah. And I think that becomes in sharp relief when you're in Tuscany, when you're on the ground, right? In the tour, we go to a winery called Contucci in Montepulciano. And so, you talk about Napa Valley, and Mondavi went to Napa Valley, in the, I don't know, late 60s, let's say 1970, something like that. So you're talking 50 something years.
Yeah.
They've been there.
Yeah.
The Contucci winery has their palazzo on the main square of Montepulciano. They have been there since the year 700.
Oh, wow.
So, they quote downsized in the year 1008 to the palazzo that they live in now. So the history is just ridiculous. And, you go down into to their wine cellars that are, directly below their family house. And even though now they have, current knowledge and more know-how than they had way back then, the area, the footprint, the space is essentially the same. And you just can't ever find that here.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point, because I think that, in Europe in general, just the architecture that stayed around, that everything doesn't look as new when you're from the States. Everything looks new, and every community you live in, they're knocking down a house that's 40 years old and building new ones. Where it seems like in the communities throughout Europe, homes stay around for, to your point, hundreds, if not longer, of years.
Yeah. And it's funny, sometimes when I'm around here or in the US and you see something like that and you're like, ah, God, it's old. It doesn't look good. And, it's kind of ratty looking. But when you're in Europe, it's almost the opposite. When you see something that's, Antinori built this, state of the art modern winery. And even though he went to great lengths to build it into the side of the hill, and the roof is literally a lawn.
Yeah.
It still looks so out of place. It just, they can tells the story about, oh, we use this architect, a world famous Italian architect. And I'm like, yeah, but it doesn't belong there.
Yeah.
It still sticks out like a sore thumb. And it's the exact opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's start with Tuscany, in general, because it's funny, John, I've gotten some friends that have been trying to explore more old world wines. They've been big Napa drinkers for a long time. And I've had several of them, I've opened a wine from Tuscany for them, and they'll go, hey, these are great. These are great. And I go, yeah, it's a Tuscan wine. And they go, okay, that's in Italy. And yeah. And they go, where exactly in Italy? Because I don't have any idea where it actually is. So can you tell people in the country of Italy kind of where Tuscany is located?
Sure. I mean, it has coastline, so it's not landlocked, right? So it's western. Did I say that right? Yeah, westernmost end is along the Mediterranean Sea. But it is pretty much smack dab in the center of the country, north-south that way. So if you were to come into Rome, it's probably about a 2.5, maybe almost 3-hour drive north of Rome. You start hitting the southern edges of Tuscany. But to get into the winemaking areas where, the action is really going on, 3 hours, 2 hours, 45 minutes, you'd be right in the heart of everything. And it is amazing. You can see, that's a drive we make every year on the tour because we start in Rome where we pick everyone up. And the changes in the landscape are dramatic. And as soon as you hit, when you leave Lazio and hit Tuscany, it isn't long before you see, the rolling hills, the olive groves, the chestnut groves, and then of course the vineyards. Whereas Lazio doesn't really have that.
So when you think about Tuscany, obviously when people think Italy, I think the first thing, to your point, you fly into Rome. Rome is what they think about, right? They think the Colosseum and all the sites, and Venice. But when you think, and I think this kind of triggers for some people when you say it, they go, oh, that's where those towns are. They don't realize it. But I think about Florence, when you think about the Renaissance and things like that, Siena, even the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and Pisa is there, I don't think they think that or realize that Tuscany is the region where these places are. But when you think about the Renaissance, and you've heard of Florence, but I don't think that association to Tuscany is there. So I'm just saying that to let folks know that this is where you would be going if you visit Tuscany. And on that note, John, would it be fair to say this might be the second largest area for tourism behind Rome, or is there another region that might compete with it?
Well, if you're talking for certain
Venice?
people, maybe Venice. For certain people are going to Florence, whether they extend that trip, outside into the countryside. Because let's be honest, Tuscany, where we're going, it's a rural, bucolic countryside kind of thing. You need a car. You're not taking a bullet train from, Siena to Montalcino or anything like that. But you can easily take a bullet train from Firenze to Rome, or from, Florence to Venice. And yeah, I would think probably, that's exactly what my tour is not, right? It's not Rome, Florence, Venice. That's Perillo. That's not rustic Tuscany. We're about slowing it down and really becoming immersed. So,
And when you slow it down, you really get a chance to visit with and meet the people that are of this community, the authenticity of these people, the foods that they eat. So talk a little bit about that part of their culture, because, if you don't know, I think most people know, there's 20 regions in Italy,
yep.
And they're all distinctively different. Even though they make up one country, for a long time they were,
different.
They were their own place, their own, kingdoms and so on. But they're all very distinctive in foods and people and somewhat the culture that they have. I'll let you expand on that a little bit more, but talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm going to kick myself later for not knowing this, but Italy has only been a unified country as we know it today.
1868.
Is that when it was? I can never remember. But it's like my point is it's younger than the United States.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that it's the old world. So they were, it was the Papal States, it was the Medici, it was, the Kingdom of Siena. They were fighting and warring for centuries, and we're not at all unified. So to that sense, that really, has ingrained the culture of what they do today, specifically with food. So, you go to Venice, you're not going to get a plate of carbonara. And if a restaurant is making it, they're probably catering to tourists, and it's probably going to be lousy. You want carbonara, you need to go to Rome. And it's the same thing in Tuscany. Tuscans are bean eaters, they're meat eaters. Their pastas are either with, if it's only with tomato sauce, that's fine. Otherwise, it typically has meat in it, and they're typically long noodles. They're called pici. If you're in Siena, they're called pinci if you're in Montalcino, but it's the exact same thing. And it's just it's a hand-rolled, handmade pasta, so it's usually never dried, and as a result, it's not at all uniform. It's kind of a thick spaghetti, but it just doesn't look very appealing in terms of its uniformity. And, they'll toss it with tomato or wild boar ragu or a beef ragu or truffles, mushrooms, whatever the season dictates. But, they don't have penne. They don't use rigatoni. They don't use orecchiette. It just doesn't work that way. Those are shapes of the South.
Is rabbit something that's popular in Tuscany?
Big time.
Big time.
Big time.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I've heard people talk about rabbit there.
Yeah, rabbit and wild boar. That's Tuscans are hunters too. There's a big wild boar hunt season every autumn. It's a big festival, but rabbits all the time. Most places we go to have rabbit on the menu, either in a ragu for pasta or just even roasted. Yeah, in pieces, and it's delicious. But I think that's true. I've had rabbit in outside of Rome in Lazio. So I think whenever you get into a more rural setting, you'll see the rabbit, and it's one thing I wish we had here more of. But it just Bugs Bunny, Peter Cottontail, nobody wants to have rabbit. But it's actually incredibly healthy for you, and it's a great source of lean protein.
Yeah, absolutely. The people, if somebody's going to go visit Tuscany, how would you describe the people of Tuscany? We're talking about just the everyday folks that you're going to encounter in these type of, rural areas that you're going to go visit. You stop in a little shop or a little cafe or something.
Mm-hmm. In the rural areas, they're very friendly. I think out in the countryside is when you might encounter someone who doesn't have a great command of English. If they're, I'll say 40, maybe 45, but if they're 40 years old or younger, they will have some English. But as I'm not fluent because I don't get to practice enough, the same thing is true with them, regarding English. But they're very friendly. They love kids. They go out of their way to make people, feel, welcome. They're accommodating. I've never had an issue in Tuscany. I mean, even in Florence, it's a bit, a major city. I was never treated, rudely or abruptly. Romans can kind of be that way, and I don't think they're actually feeling as though they're put off. I just think they're a little bit dogmatic. They're regimented. This is how it should be. And we're Romans. We're from the Roman Empire. We descend from. Who are you going to tell us how to be? So I think there's a little bit of that, but I've never really seen that anywhere else.
In Tuscany, a little more laid back, friendly, welcoming. All that kind of stuff. I like it when people come visit.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean it's a hospitality region.
Yeah. I knew that the larger areas, like Florence and Montalcino and places like that would get a lot of tourism. But even when you get out of those places, I'm sure within Tuscany, they still like seeing folks. I think every small town's that way. Somebody new in town visiting. It's always nice to see somebody new.
Oh, without question. I mean, some of the stops we roll into for lunch during the tour, the population of this one town we go to, it's like 20 people.
Yeah.
And so we roll in with 2 vans and we're adding 14, we're almost doubling the population of the town. And, the old men are sitting on the steps of the church, they're playing their game or they're drinking a Fernet in the afternoon. And they're like, what's going on here? Who are these people?
We're being invaded.
We're being invaded, but it's gives them something to talk about that day, I guess.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, now we're going to get to the good stuff. We're going to jump into the wines of Tuscany, and I just think when you start talking about these regions where wines come from, you really need to have an understanding of the place and the people and the food, because, like you said earlier, they just all go together, and they're a part of what makes what we have in the bottle so good, is understanding the culture and the history and the food and all that. But now we'll jump into the wines, and we're going to get into the wines of this region, but it all starts with the grape, John. And a lot of people don't know that these different wines that we're going to talk about are all the same grape or a clone of the grape Sangiovese. Can you tell us a little bit about this grape? And I know, you like me, or me like you, we love this grape. I mean, it's just such a great grape for a lot of reasons, but I'll let you jump into talking about this grape, its characteristics and things.
So, as you mentioned, it's, the grape of Tuscany really is Sangiovese, translates to the blood of Jove. And so your typical color of a Sangiovese wine is a deep, ruby red. Most regions in Tuscany, in Brunello, for example, the Brunello has to be 100% Sangiovese. They've committed to that for years and years and years. In Montepulciano, where they make Vino Nobile, in Chianti, where they make Chianti Classico, those regions still allow a certain degree of blending. But there's a more and more of an emphasis on moving towards 100% Sangiovese in a lot of the wines. They're trying to exalt the quality of that grape. Now, I mean, I love Sangiovese because it has a lot of acidity to it, but it has a lot of bright wild berry and dark cherry fruit flavors. But that acidity makes it marry well with food. And that's what I love about Sangiovese, because it's so versatile. If you get a full-bodied one like a Brunello or a Gran Selezione from Chianti Classico, you can sit down with a short rib or an ossobuco or a big thick steak. But in the hands of a vintner who makes several different levels of Sangiovese, it can be a lighter weight, medium bodied wine that you just don't want to think about too much, but it's great with pizza. I know you love to make, your pizzas outside. I mean, it's the perfect thing to just, the acidity cuts right through the fat and the cheese on the pizza, and the saltiness of a prosciutto or something like that. It's just probably for me, it's the most versatile food wine that there is, and in my family and the way we do things, on the tour, but we never have wine without food. It just never is. So I think that's why it's such an important wine for me.
And the grape also, in a lot of the areas that you mentioned, uh, it still has great structure. I mean, it's still a wine that,
Definitely.
more and more can be approachable a little bit younger, but also can be laid down for 10, 20, 30 years, if not more.
Yeah, I mean, in the more recent vintages, with the climate warming a little bit more, has definitely increased that, I guess, propensity to have a wine drink better a little bit younger. I've been publishing articles now on the 2019 Brunello vintage, which is the latest vintage that's out on the market right now. But those wines were released, this past January, so they've been out now for a good almost a year, and they're still drinking really, really well when I open them. I've done 20 something that I've published. I've got 2 or 3 more parts still to go. That I'll probably finish up, before the end of the year, when in January, then the 2020s will start coming out. But
Well, let's dive
you,
into that a little bit with the
sure.
2019s. Just, obviously, if you want to go get, the complete rundown on all the 2019 Brunellos, go to johnfodera.com and check them out. But just kind of giving us an overview of that vintage. And people are hearing us go 2019. That's as you just said, if they didn't catch it, that's the current release. That's the most recent release. The next one will be in 2020, as you said, because these are held back for 5 years from harvest. And tell us kind of the rules on a Brunello so people can kind of understand, what does that mean, held back? How is it held back? Is it in bottle, in barrel? How does that work?
Right. So Brunello by law can't be released before the 5th January after the harvest. So, like you said, this coming January, 2 months from now, basically, the 2020s are legally allowed to be sold. So Brunello still has, in that sense, 4 years of aging required. At least 2 of those years have to be in wood. And that can be in several different kinds of wood. Oak is pretty much the only wood that's used now, but it could be French, it could be Hungarian, it could be Austrian, Slavonian. A lot of wineries are mixing it up.
I didn't hear you say American.
No American oak in Tuscany. No. Probably for 2 reasons. I think that, that wouldn't work well with Sangiovese. The tannins that can be assertive in American oak, which are great for Napa Cabernets, would overwhelm Sangiovese. And plus, I think it's just also a cost factor.
Yeah.
The Slavonian oak is generally the oak that's used for most Brunello. So that is usually in a huge barrel, 60, I can't convert in my head. I never can do it, but I mean, 50, 60 hectoliters of a barrel, filled with Sangiovese. When you use French oak, the barrel's usually smaller, either a 500-liter barrique, which is what you see in Bordeaux, or even the tonneau, which is slightly larger than that. But so you have 4 years total aging. Most wineries, depending on the vintage, depending on the quality, how tannic it may be, or whatever the structure of the grapes, I think you see, I would say 2.5 to 3 years in wood, and then a year. Well, a year in bottle, but somewhere in there before the release, they usually pull it out of wood and dump it into either stainless steel or to cement to kind of settle the wine, especially if they're blending different lots or different vineyards, and then they bottle it and it stays, in bottle for another year. That's part of the problem, honestly, not to get off on a tangent, but I just saw, the Benvenuto Brunello tasting for 2020 Brunello now is going to be in Montalcino this month. I think it's in like a week. And they keep putting it up, in November. Whereas in New York, it won't be till January or maybe even February.
Yeah.
And that's what I usually attended. I'm not usually in Montalcino this time of year, but in Montalcino, they're doing it in November. And, so many of the producers are like, we don't want to show our wine because we basically just bottled it. Or, we bottled it in September and it's been in the bottle, a month and a half. It's not good to taste on it now. And, but, they moved everything forward, with COVID. I'm not really sure why, but it never went back to the regular schedule.
Well, talking about 2019, now that we kind of have an understanding of why we're talking about that as the current release, that vintage, let's talk about, it's been out a year. You've drunk a lot of these wines and have given some reviews on them. And then kind of roll that into, how excited are you for February to roll around, January, February, where you can start, tasting some of these 2020s. So start with the 2019. What do you like about this vintage?
What I love about 2019, and when you talk to, the winemakers, we're talking about state of Tuscany, and I was just there, right, in September, and talking about 2019, tasting 2019s, all the winemakers said, essentially, it was the last normal vintage, right, in terms of a growing season. The spring wasn't too fast. Sometimes if it's too warm too soon and the buds on the vines start opening up, and then in April, bang, you get a cold snap, you can get a frost damage and you can lose, 30, 40, 50% of your vineyard. So it's a nice even spring with just enough rain coming out of the winter, a little bit of snow, a little bit of rain, have plenty of water reserves in the soil. Beautiful summer, dry during the harvest, and, hot, but not boiling hot. There were a couple triple digit heat spikes, but not for an extended period of time. And then just perfect weather, to harvest. So what I've seen is the 19s are fresh. They've got great acidity, a lot of aromatics and freshness to them. And, they're drinking well right now. And they have been, when I was on the tour last year and we were tasting 19s that were in bottle, but not, really eligible to be released, but the winemakers opened it for my group. They were tasting great then. So they've never really hit that phase where they've shut down at all. But they have that structure, like you mentioned, so they're full-bodied wines, but the tannins are so well integrated. You can have them now with food, and you don't care that it's 4 years old. But when it's 10 years old, it's still going to be great. So the vintage wasn't a slam dunk, as I've written about. There are a lot of, well, not a lot, but I have come across, more than a handful, let's say, of wines. Depending on where they are in the zone, the alcohol creeped up to 15.5.
That's big.
Yeah, it's big. And it's, the wine is balanced, but at that percentage, if you don't do a good job, you start to get into that kind of like, for me, it's like a heavy, plummy kind of pruny flavor. Just a little bit overdone. You lose some of that freshness.
I just got to think the weight of the wine with that much alcohol too is going to be bigger than what I would expect from or want from a Sangiovese.
Yeah, I mean, I think, excuse me, it's funny because years ago, I remember, port was like 15 or 16%. And it would be like, oh man, well, who wants to drink that after you're having a meal, with a couple bottles of wine, but the wines then were 13.5% alcohol.
Yeah.
But they are balanced. They're big and they're heavy, but not heavy in the sense of being cloying or out of balance. But they're
Okay.
just they lose some of that nuance that I love about Sangiovese. It's all about the fruit. Um, it's fruit tannins and alcohol, and you see, not to a in every case, but what I've noticed is some of those heavier wines, if you will, in the alcohol are aged in smaller barrels. So you're getting more tannin, more alcohol, more fruit, but not a lot of complexity, not a lot of nuance. It's just not my favorite style.
Does it still stay with a red fruit kind of being the forward kind of characteristic, or is it?
I don't think so. I
Okay.
don't think so. To me, that's when they start getting into like the black plum,
Yeah.
black cherry. Black cherry's okay, but black cherry verging onto almost, black plum and black raspberry, it's very, very dark fruit forward.
Okay. Yeah. And not something just when I think Sangiovese, I go to, more red fruit. You can get that subtle kind of behind the scene, that little bit of that darker cherry, but the red fruit is usually what stands out for me and what I enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. So 2019 overall vintage, you say if you see them on the shelf, should still be buying them?
Oh yeah. Yeah. For Brunello, it's a 5-star vintage. I mean, across Chianti Classico and the wines I've had, even from, base Chianti Classicos that are, $15 to $20. They're beautiful, beautiful wines. We've had plenty of Vino Nobile on the tour this year from 19. Those are beautiful wines. I mean, it really did make for a wonderful vintage. So that it's hard to find a bad wine.
Okay. And then if we roll that into 2020, I mean, because you've already, this is taking you back in time a little bit, John, because you did, all your reviews of the Chiantis and Chianti Classicos and the Vino Nobles de Montepulcianos and all of this a few years ago. So now roll that into trying to remember, and I'm sure you've been, you've had opportunities to taste the 2020s when you go over there and visit. I'm sure they give you a sip here and there, but what are you expecting from the 2020 vintage that'll be released on the Brunellos?
Yeah, I mean, one good thing I always tell people, 2020 was obviously like the first, or the bulk of the COVID period, if you will. The one good thing about that was it was pretty great vintage, actually. A little warmer than 2019 in general, so some of the wines are bigger, but of really good quality. It was a smaller harvest. There was a little bit more like issues with the spring weather that reduced yield. But I just have recently had a couple of 2020, IGT wines. I just had tonight. I was tasting, Folinari's Cabrera Il Borgo. A couple nights ago, I had a 2020 Tignanello Fermentinori. So that's, you kind of get your first, glimpse, if you will, a harbinger of what's to come with Brunello. But when we were there, in September, we did, well, they're not in barrel anymore. They were bottled, but we were tasting some 2020s. We tasted 21 and 22 out of cask. 22 was, not really recognizable yet as Brunello. It's still a total baby. But you could see how the evolution was very noticeable from 20 to 21 and 22, how different they were. 2021 is going to be another great vintage as well, but also even hotter than 2020. So I think 2020 will probably be a really good year for Brunellos. You'll see a lot of really nice wines. Again, maybe a little lower in quantity, but I think the quality is going to be great.
Do you see, you keep talking about the years getting a little warmer and warmer. Are winemakers trying to adjust? Are they doing harvest a little earlier and things like this to try to, watching that alcohol level, the sugar level, I should say, in the grapes?
Well, you know what? It's funny you say that because, when we were laying out the itinerary for this past tour, the first couple of years we had always gone, mid to late October. And for a variety of reasons, we couldn't do that this year. So my partner and I were like, well, we're going to go in September. And I'm like, well, you know, I'm like, everybody's going to be, harvesting. Are we going to be, we going to get the same accents that we get, or are we going to be in the way? And nobody really cared, that was actually a really pleasant surprise for me. The hospitality people, are typically not involved with the harvesting. And so maybe we didn't get as much exposure with the winemakers as we normally do. But when we were there, it all just depends. I mean, stupid to say, right? But it all just depends on the weather. The weather in the beginning of September was very, very rainy and very, very cool. So everybody was waiting. And when we were there, from I think it was the 17th to the 27th, people were like, oh, we're going to wait, another 10 days. And because of the weather that, like I said, it was cloudy, a little rainy, I spoke to Elisa Fonte and I said, well, what's going on? And she's like, the Trebbiano is still only at, 12 and a half degrees. So we haven't even picked that yet. It's going to be another 2 weeks for Sangiovese. And, Daniele up in my winemaker friend up in San Gimignano, he picked his Sangiovese after I was already back in the U.S. So he was picking probably the beginning of October. Now that is a time frame that you would have almost have seen, before this recent, global warming. That was a normal time frame that you would have had, 10 or 12 years ago. So you never really know what's going to happen. And there, this year they were pretty happy with the quality, despite the, they had some really, really wild, weather issues this growing season, with wind and hail and, I mean, torrential thunderstorms and flooding. So the yields will be way down, no question about that. 30 to 50% less production, depending on where your vineyards happen to be. But we'll see. I mean, they're hoping for good quality with what they got. I mean, it's not going to be a washed out, vintage at all. Most people were able to either harvest, before a big string of rainstorms, or they waited even longer and harvested in October, and things look like they were pretty good.
So staying on Brunello, the 2024 won't be out for 5 years, but looks to be, pretty decent vintage as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, they haven't had a washout in, a long time. 2014 was probably the worst.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Rolling, staying kind of in that Brunello area, Montalcino. I want to talk a little bit about a wine that, I feel like a lot of people shouldn't just pass up on the shelf when they see it. If you've never had one, try one, and maybe you'll recommend a couple they should try that are here in the States. But it's the Rosso de Montalcino.
Oh, it's true. Yeah, I mean, Rosso is the baby brother, so to speak, of Brunello. So same grape, 100% Sangiovese, but the Rosso is only aged for up to 2 years before it can be released. So that is, a wine that is made for, easier drinking. Again, your pizzas, your pastas, maybe when you don't want the structure or the weight, even the character of a Brunello. Montalcinese, I drink, Rosso de Montalcino every day. But, my issue with Rosso de Montalcino, at least in this country, is it's usually not the best value. The prices can kind of creep up close to $25 to $30. And there are some good ones. And unfortunately, there's no way of really knowing, right? So I think we may have talked about this before, where let's just assume, a producer has a certain amount of fruit, and he says, okay, these 10 barrels are going to be, they're great. They're going to be my Brunello. These other barrels, they're not so good. We're just going to make them Rosso. So that's the decision point, right? That's at the very end of the process. But you have some other, for example, Andrea Cortanese, the owner of Uccelliera, he says all the time, he goes, my goal is to make a Rosso, which really could be Brunello, but it just doesn't have quite what I want it to have. Some of his Rossos have been the best I've ever had. And he has two labels, the Uccelliera and Vogliero. I think it was the 2015 Vogliero Rosso di Montalcino, probably the best Rosso I've ever had. And, he said, and I asked him, I'm like, what happened here? And he's like, well, he goes, it was going to be a Brunello, but then I needed something to sell. He needed that cash flow, but also just the cellar space, right? You're a small producer. If you're not a giant like, Antinori or Bonfi or Ruffino, you don't have the room to hold on to things. You need to get them out of the cellar. So that's the unromantic side of winemaking, right?
But that's still
a business.
That's a great point, though, John, because when you think about it, and you've talked a little bit about, the yields of year to year, depending on weather and how everything goes, what the yields are. I mean, you get 2 or 3 years in a row that are really nice, as far as everything lining up to produce really well and give you good yields, that are still high quality grapes for great wines. Your cellar does fill up. And,
right.
There's only, you think about Brunello, it's 5 years for each one of those. So at some point, 3 years in, if you have 3 years in a row, you're going, I'm out of room. So that's a great point. It's something that people might want to pay attention to when you see vintages back to back to back really good. You might go, this is the year I might look for some Rosso di Montalcino because I could get some pretty good stuff probably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, taking Uccelliera as an example, when we were there in September, he was still holding on to 2019, that he wasn't sold out yet. He had 2019, 2020 in bottle, taking up space. Then he had 21, 22, and 23 in oak in the cellar. And, they were getting ready, making preparations to bring in 24, which he didn't bring in, right away. But the other point I was going to make is, so sometimes you just have a producer that says, okay, this is my juice. The best ones are Brunello, and what I don't want to be Brunello, I'm going to call it Rosso so I can sell it and get rid of it. But then there are other producers that have vineyards that are not within the zone for Brunello, but they are in the zone for Sangiovese. So, for Rosso di Montalcino. So if you imagine concentric circles coming out, the center of or for example, like a bullseye for darts, right? The bullseye would be Brunello. And then as you go further out, you might find Rosso di Montalcino. So where they can't call it Brunello, even if they wanted to, those kind of producers try to make a better Rosso di Montalcino, I think, is my opinion. And the only way to know is to, read someone like me and to just learn and to know, because you can't tell by looking at a bottle. You have to know, what the producer, what their mindset is, what their reputation is, how they like to work.
And I'm assuming some of that geographical area is based on, tell me if I'm wrong, John, is there some, want or requirement to be on, the sides of hills and slopes so that you get the certain amount of sunlight, to be Brunello? Once you get down lower off Montalcino, and you're probably getting out of the Brunello category. Is that kind of how it works, or how does that work?
The DOCG zone for Brunello is legally defined, right? So there's only so many hectares that you can plant for Brunello. So I can't walk in there and, go across the road and say, oh, there's a wheat field here. Let me rip it up and plant Brunello. I mean, if the road is the boundary for the Brunello zone, even though it's only the width of a road, I can't plant Brunello across the street, right?
Well, you can plant Sangiovese, you just can't call it
Sure.
Brunello. So let me ask you this: do they ever? Can you produce what is thought to be a high quality wine for a while? It's not Brunello. Will they go? Can you petition and ask to be, rezoned and be included in that, or do they do that, or no?
They have increased the size of the Brunello zone over the years. It has not happened in a long time. But to your point, yeah, you could definitely plant Sangiovese there and call it, give it a fancy name and call it an IGT and, age it as long as you think you need to age it and probably get it on the market a lot faster than, the 5th January after harvest. There's plenty of that going on for sure.
Yeah. Because I just think if you're not going to consider rezoning, if you see people doing, quality wines out of a different area, then land runs out, right? It's tough to get in there to be a producer of Brunello. I mean, it's kind of like a very small group at that point.
Yeah, I always forget the exact analogy, but I think it's 3 times. I think Brunello is 3 times the size of Manhattan Island. Oh,
really?
Yeah. So it's not big.
Wow.
And I mean, I've been to Manhattan I had a reason to be there one time on a Sunday morning. I don't know if it was during COVID, but I had to be in the city on a Sunday morning at like 9 a.m. and there was nobody there. And I went from like 121st Street all the way down to, Lower Manhattan by Ground Zero, driving down 5th Avenue, whatever it was. I made it in like 10 minutes. I mean, it was ridiculous, so it's not far, but Montalcino is a pyramid. It's, kind of got 4 sides to it. And, you can't drive in a straight line in Tuscany. I mean, it doesn't exist.
Okay. As we leave Montalcino and we go into, Montepulciano and Chianti, these regions, if you liked the 2024 vintage for Brunello, I'm assuming you think they're going to be pretty good for Chianti and for Vino Nobile as well.
Yeah, Nobile is going to be really great. I mean, that's not too dissimilar from Brunello. Again, it's, I don't know how many miles it is. It's not far at all as the crow flies, but to drive it, it's probably about an hour from Montalcino. Yeah, the wines that we tasted there from Contucci, from Boscarelli, the younger wines too. Even Rosato, even Rosé, you get an idea of the quality. And we were there at Boscarelli in September, and they were harvesting, Sangiovese. It was going on the sorting line right when we were there, and we were sitting there watching, and they were picking they were picking out the cluster. So any cluster that had a green grape was pulled out. And they had like a little tractor, filled with those plastic. I mean, for people in the U.S., they know them like the milk gallons come in those plastic, containers, those crates, right? And they were filled with grapes. And I said it was the owner of Boscarelli, and I said, well, what is going on here? And he's like, oh, that. He goes, these are young Sangiovese grapes. They don't go into our Nobile. He goes, so we're either going to use some of that, we'll pick through them again for maybe a Rosato, or we're just going to throw them, back into the vineyards, and we'll plow it into the ground for fertilizer. Yeah. So they use everything. But he was very happy with what he had, and we went out into the vineyards and we were tasting grapes off of the vines. We tasted, Primolo Gentile, which is Sangiovese. We tasted Sangiovese, Malvasia Nera, We tasted Foglio Tondo. And those grapes were just, it's interesting to do that because some of that I had never done before with some of those varietals, and you could tell the difference in the grape. It tasted completely different. One was floral, one was very acidic, one was peppery, one was sweeter and rounder. And they all contribute different things to a blended wine. But the quality was great with what they had. Again, the yields were down, but the quality seemed to be really, really good.
Okay. So anything in that region that stands out to you, any producer that kind of, you ran into and went, wasn't on my radar, but yeah, you've got some good stuff going on here and maybe we ought to look out for or anything. I know you like Boscarelli a lot in Vino Nobile.
Yeah, Poliziano, their crew is really great. Boscarelli is really great, but there's a winery, two of them really. One is, they're both available in the U.S., although the first one probably more than the second. But one is Salchetto. So Salchetto is a medium-sized winery, fully biodynamic, fully organic, doing a lot of work, reducing the shape of their bottles to minimize the glass. Their stuff comes through really, really well. And then the other one is Monte Mercurio. So that, to me, was kind of a revelation. I had done a Nobile report a few years back, and they submitted samples to me. And I remember them because I was like, wow, these wines are great. And, when we were on the tour, we were out in, Montepulciano having lunch, and, I was looking at the wine list to see what we wanted. And I saw they had Monte Mercurio on there, and I'm like, we have to get that. And it blew everybody away. It really, really was great. Great, great wine and super affordable. I mean, under $30. And the idea nowadays that these producers, almost all of them, have some form of online e-shop where you can order and they'll ship to you, and it's worth it because it's worth it if they don't have a wide distribution here.
It's just finding them. We need guys like you. That's another reason to go read your articles, because some might not be highly distributed in the United States. But to your point, John, you give information on how to buy these wines on all of your reviews. And that might be one of the options, is just to go directly through the winery.
Yeah. And, people, they don't realize, well, oh, then I got to ship it. Well, I'm like, yeah, you got to ship it. But, see what it costs to ship it. It's not as expensive as you think. And it's certainly not, risky these days. Yeah. And, depending on where you are, you're not going to pay sales tax. So that's going to offset some of the shipping.
and I always say too, get a friend to do it with you. Build the case together. Get 6 each or something, and offset
split
that
a
cost.
case.
Yeah,
split it. And some producers are different than others. Some of them, and I don't know how it works, but I've shipped a case home to my house for €50. I've had people charge me €90.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know what, if they're making a markup or if it's just who they happen to be using. There's all sorts of logistics companies, but, I get emails, I get tracking, no issues clearing customs. There's no duty, nothing like that.
Yeah.
You just want to make sure that if you're not, I'm on the East Coast, obviously you're in Texas where it's very hot. You don't want to be shipping at the wrong time of year. So from now until, March, go for it. And let that be your window.
But, to that point, doesn't mean you can't buy the wines when you see them, because they'll hold them for you. If you want to buy it in July, they usually they'll hold them for you and ship them in, October, November.
And I did just that. I was over there in July doing some work for the tour, and I visited a couple of future places that we're going to put on the itinerary, and I bought some wine, and I was like, look, I don't, it's July 15th. I don't ship it till after October 1st. And they're like, sure, no problem.
Yeah.
Obviously you have to pay for it, but yeah, they don't care.
Yeah.
And the other good thing about, when you're involved with a winery like this, like you said, you learn about the people, you get closer to them. It's a little bit more familiar to you. It's a little bit richer of an experience. And, a lot of these places make phenomenal olive oil, so that you're in on that as well.
And I'll also throw this out from kind of that nostalgia kind of, part of it. Uh, you know, Look, all the bottles come from the winery. They all come from, uh, there where they start. But let's be honest. Sometimes they get to the United States. They sit in a distributor's warehouse for however long. Then they finally get to a shelf at a grocery store or at Total Wine big box store or something like that. It's kind of cool to go, hey, just had these shipped to me from the winery. The winery with those bottles have been taken care of. I'm not saying the other ones haven't, but the risk of something has to be lessened when you're getting the wine directly from the winery there.
I mean, I think it's zero.
Yeah.
I mean, when you and that's the beauty of when you're on an estate or on my tour. I had a guy who was with me. We went to Castello Bonfi and we were tasting, probably I think the 2020 Sumis, which is one of Bonfi's, luxury super Tuscans. And he was like, well, do you have, I really like this, but for me, it's a little young. Do you have one that's older? And I'm like, oh yeah, we have the 2012. And he's like,
Yeah.
great. So it was still a lot cheaper than it would be if you found it here. It wasn't, exorbitant, but he was asking me, he's like, well, what do you think? I'm like, what do you mean? What do I think? I mean, it's been downstairs in their cellar since it's been bottled. It's been sitting there since 2012. It hasn't left the estate. You're never going to get a better Providence than that. They put it in styrofoam and they ship it FedEx. I mean, how much more do you want?
Yeah, that's exactly
go
right.
for it.
But to that point too, when you're over there visiting, they do have a little bit of a library wine collection that you might be able to get a bottle or two from that, to your point, you're not going to find anywhere over here. Usually, a certain amount of those get sent over, then they're gone. They're out of rotation, if you will. But going to the winery, look, they always have a few held back, and you might be able to get one.
Oh yeah, we were. I'm so tempted. Next year they have. We go to Castello di Monsanto in way up north in Chianti Classico, very high altitude producer. They have one of the largest libraries, if not the largest library of their wines in Europe, if not, or in Italy rather, if not Europe. And the caves that they have under the castle are ancient, and they're all just stacked up on one another down there by wine, by vintage. And every year, they target a specific wine or vintage, and the winemaker and the owner of the estate, they grab a couple bottles, they pop them, they taste it and see what it's like. And, they have wine that they save then to top it up and recork it if they have to. So my birth vintage was 68, so there's not a lot of wines around from that. And if you could find one, like you said, God knows where it's been. They have the 68 single vineyard, what was a Chianti Classico Reserve, and now it's Grand Selezione. They have it there for, I don't know, I think it was a couple €100. I don't remember how much it cost, but I'm sorely tempted because I've never had a wine from my birth year. And I know the lengths that they go through to try to keep these wines, in good shape.
Yeah. If you get that, that's my birth year too. So we may have to order a couple of those together.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah. Okay. We can't, close out the episode without talking about the other big red wine region in Tuscany. Well, there's two of them, a little bit on Chianti. We kind of touched on it briefly, but any news there? Obviously 2024 going to be a good vintage, but anything changing, anything, recategorized or anything that jumps to mind that we need to be aware of? Or
Well, no, I don't think so. I mean, as much as they like to, push the boundaries. Things happen slowly in Chianti, where you have a huge consortio. They just reelected Giovanni Minetti, the owner of Fontodi, to be the president of the consortio again. He's done a very good job, I think. So that was I think that was actually important, more important than people probably realize. He was responsible for a lot of the inertia behind Gran Selezione and things like that. So the newest thing, which was really, I guess it was the middle of last year, and it's beginning with wines that are of, oh boy, I think the 2021 vintage. So only for Gran Selezione, now you can label with a specific, what they call a UGA, which is it means an additional geographic location. There's a long Italian, words behind it. So they denoted several different spots for these UGAs. For example, Castelnuovo, Castellina, Panzano, Rada. And now you can see, so in the example of Fontodi, it would be Panzano. So it would be Fontodi, Chianti Classico, Gran Selezione, and then it would also say Panzano. So what that means is the grapes have to be grown, they have to be estate grown, and they have to be grown in Panzano. So, for example, maybe Fontodi owned a vineyard, all the way down, at the lower end of the Chianti Classical zone, nowhere near Panzano. They could take those grapes, blend it in, call it a Chianti Classico, call it a Reserva. What they could do whatever they wanted up until now. But now they can't do that anymore, if they choose to label it that way. But it can only be for the Gran Selezione that you'll see that additional labeling on it.
And again, it sounds like the reason to do that is to express to the consumer that there's this additional layer of quality that you should be getting in this wine.
I think it's an additional layer of specificity.
Which you think would equal quality, you hope?
It could. I mean, again, it depends on the producer. The producer could be lousy and put that on there. And that usually is not the case, but I mean, it could happen. But I think the important thing is that they're trying to. So, for example, when Gran Selezione came into being, I think it had to be 80% Sangiovese. Now it has to be 90%.
And they're almost all 100%.
Oh, yeah. I would say the majority are, and that remaining 10% can no longer be an international grape. So that it used to be able to use, Merlot, Cabernet, Syrah, whatever. Now you can't do that anymore either. It has to be, Canaiolo, Colorino, Malvasia, something like that if you're going to blend.
Yeah. Because as you're describing this kind of new labeling on the bottle, it makes me think of Napa. When you think Napa Valley, Cabernet Sauvignon, but then if it says Rutherford or Stag's Leap District, to me, I'm going, okay, now I'm getting into a smaller kind of area where the grapes come from. And I assume that, that area is known for having good fruit. So I'm assuming I'm going to have something good in the bottle.
Correct. But that style. So like if you see a Cabernet with Rutherford, right? It's going to be that powdery Rutherford, dusty, smooth tannins, right? As opposed to
Calistoga,
Spring Mountain or where you've got, big time, high mountain fruit, big time tannins, like that. It's the same thing where, the Chiantis from Castellina, Castelnuovo, even Panzano can be rounder, fruitier, maybe a little higher in alcohol. It's lower altitude there. It's further south in the zone, as opposed to, say, Rada or Greve or Gaiole, where the altitude is much higher, and you get a little bit more austere is really not a good word, but that's kind of what it's like. You're more floral, more delicate, more elegant, more feminine, graceful. So it's a different kind of style.
So when you get to that wine, the Grand Selezione, and you start looking at the price of those, should there be a consideration, or do you make the jump to Brunello, or is it just a completely different style? So you shouldn't try to compare and say, hey, there's this threshold of dollar amount that once I hit it, I need to jump to Brunello, or is that just a very subjective and you do your thing?
It is definitely 100% subjective, but I do that. I mean, some of the Grand Selezione are priced, stupidly.
Yeah,
I mean,
I've seen that.
100 and a quarter, 150. I mean, it's dumb.
Yeah.
I can get a phenomenal bottle of Brunello for $50 or $60.
Yeah.
But is it different? Yeah. I mean, it's the soils in Chianti Classico are different. The altitude, the aging requirements, again, the blending. If you had a 100% Sangiovese Grand Selezione, that would be your best comparison to a Brunello. But again, it's further north. The altitude is much, even the lowest Chianti Classical vineyard is probably higher than Brunello, and the soils are very, very different.
Yeah.
There's Brunello is harvesting on the southern half of the Brunello zone. They could be harvesting 3 weeks ahead of Chianti, if not more.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is a different wine for sure, and I like them both. I mean, it's like lamb and beef or beef and veal, however you want to think about it.
But you still look for value.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. It's hard for me to justify paying more for a Grand Selezione than what I know I can get a great bottle of Brunello for.
Sure, that makes sense.
I mean,
and I buy the same way, John. I buy the same way.
Yeah, I mean, because to me, if you're buying a wine, it's 90% Sangiovese and let's just say 5% Colorino, 5% Malvasia. I mean, it's not going to behave that much differently than a 100% Sangiovese. Maybe a little more floral. The Colorino does to a wine exactly what it sounds like. Colorino. It makes it darker. Colorino makes the blend darker. But yeah, for me, the finished wine is very similar, and I'm going to be eating the same kind of food with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I that's when I vote with my wallet.
Well, let's finish out this episode staying in Tuscany, a region that I think you like, but I don't think it's not your go-to because these aren't necessarily indigenous grapes, but that's the Super Tuscans. We kind of threw it out there a couple times. You mentioned you had a Tiganillo, 2020 Tiganillo here recently, but there's some great wines from this region. But what do you see? What do you like? What are you thinking about? Besides the price tag continuing to go up.
Yeah, well, that's the problem, right? I mean, that's part of what doing what I do, and the value that I try to bring to my readers, because anybody can write up a Sassicaia or an Ornellaia or a Tignanello. I mean, yeah, those wines are great. They are what they are for a reason, and they're phenomenal. But now Tignanello is, if you're lucky, 140, 150 a bottle. I mean, and the others, from Maremma, the Cabernet-based wines are close to 200 to 250, depending where you are.
Yeah.
So it's, can I find, a similar wine, and can I discover the next one of those things? But it's not easy. I mean, no one has discovered the next, Michael Jordan, right? There's Kobe and there's LeBron, but there's not too many of them.
Yeah, they're close, but they're not quite there. Yeah.
Michael Jordan was the 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
So it's a long time. But, Maremma has a lot of great wines. Again, they have Sangiovese down there. But they can't bottle Sangiovese. Sangiovese from there has to be an IGT. There's no DOC for it down there. They're mostly, Cabernet Franc, Merlot. not my favorite Italian wines to drink, although they're great quality. But to me, it's kind of like they're very reminiscent of Bordeaux, and that's the way that they're meant to be. But it's Bordeaux that's just to me like riper, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's so Italy's hotter. It's kind of like a real hybrid between Napa and Bordeaux. It kind of fits right there in the middle. And the wines are nice. I like them a lot, but I struggle with the same kind of thing. With the foods we tend to eat, I'm like, well, how often do you need a Bordeaux? Your Bordeaux doesn't go great with pasta or with chicken or with a risotto. It's lamb, it's beef, and we just don't. It doesn't really have a fit for me.
Gotcha.
But to your point, a lot of the Super Tuscans that come out of Chianti Classico are some of the best, that existed since the beginning of the category. And even though a lot of producers could now conceivably call them a Grand Selezione, they don't, because they have an incredible amount of value built up into their name. Tignanello, Le Pergola Torte, Ceparello, Fontaloro, Flaccinello, all those wines could be Grand Selezione, but they're not, because they have value in that name. And Fontotti's Flaccinello is just drop dead outstanding wine. But it's, again, to your point, we were just talking about, Flaccinello is probably $160, $175 now, 100% Sangiovese.
Yeah,
that's probably more expensive than just about any Brunello.
Yeah, but I guess that's capitalism, right? People are buying it, so they're going to keep selling it like
absolutely.
that.
Absolutely, and a lot of that is the U.S. system. It's not so much the winery doing that. Yes, the winery has raised their prices, but Flaccinello sells for a lot less in Canada than it does in the U.S.
Yeah.
So there's that, but. Last time I bought Flaccinello in Italy, I think I paid like €90 for it when it was, $130 here.
Yeah.
And
I'll be honest. I'll be honest and I'll give you my perspective. My take on this is that, I totally get that, Cabernet, the wines of Bordeaux, Cabernet, Merlot, Cab Franc, whatever, are wines of the world. They're grown in a lot of different places. So I can find those all over. If I'm going to go drink wine from an old world country, I really want to explore, what are the grapes that are indigenous to that country? And it kind of expresses to me, what that country is, the food of that region, the wine of that region. They're made in styles that go together in all 20 regions for a reason. And I want to explore and experience that. I don't want to go to Paris, France and order a pizza. I'm going to go to Paris and order something else that's a French dish, coq au vin or something, so I don't want to go to Italy. I don't mind some Super Tuscans. Look, we all have some. I have a few, but it's not my go-to when I go to Italy. I think that was kind of your point as well. We drank them, but if I'm going to, if somebody asks me, give me a few regions in Italy and a few wines to drink from Italy, I don't know that Super Tuscan would ever make my list. There's just so many great wines from the north to the south that I would mention before I would mention Super Tuscans.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, and Super Tuscan, it's not so much an area either as it is like maybe down in Maremma, where you do find those Cabernet Franc, Merlot blends. That's what they do there. But the Brunello wineries, Montalcinese wineries, all have a Super Tuscan. It's just something that doesn't conform to the blending laws. Which Liera makes a great one, but it's only like $30. And that's a delicious wine. But everybody's got, I don't know, a couple rows of Cabernet or a couple rows of Merlot, and they make it because they can, and they sell it. Maybe they just sell it purely for cash flow. They sell it as, what they call vino sfuso. So it's some trattoria's, house red, and they whisper to you, "Oh, this comes from Il Pogione." They sell it to, and everybody, we buy it. It's €40 for a quart or whatever, however they sell it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, everything has its place. But I'm with you. I mean, you know, Italy is Barolo, it's Sangiovese, it's Chianti, it's Brunello, it's, all those other little wines. Like you said, when we're down at the beginning of the tour before we start, my partner and I were hanging out in a hotel out near the airport in Lazio, and we go out to dinner, and it's like there's no Brunellos on the wine list there. It's Lazio. They have the Lazio wines. They have all these whites, and they've got rosés, and they've got a couple of reds from Cesanese, and they drink what they have there. They don't bring it in from Tuscany. That stays in Tuscany.
Yeah, and I like that about those places. So yeah. Well, John, this is always fun, man. Always informational. You give great information. And I always enjoy our conversation. So I appreciate you coming on again.
Likewise. Time flew, huh?
Yeah. Hour 20 into this, and we're finally, I could go another hour, to be honest with you.
We still keep going. That's why we keep coming back.
That's why we keep coming back.
It's a big topic.
Yep, we'll definitely do it again. And we want to say thank you to everybody for listening to this episode of Food, Wine, and Whiskey. And until our next episode, enjoy your next pour.